This channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we're talking about space.
Space.
Space. Space movies, in particular. Obviously, there have been a lot of movies set in space over the years. Uh, Going back to one of the very first motion pictures of all time, which was A Voyage to the Moon.
Yes.
Um, People have been depicting going to space in movies, but we picked four, each of them by prominent directors. Although that wasn't like the thought process exactly on the ones we picked, but we have Apollo 13, directed by Ron Howard. Sunshine, directed by Danny Boyle. Gravity, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, which I had forgotten until I rewatched it. And The Martian, directed by Ridley Scott, who, of course, has done space movies before. At least one. A couple. I guess, well, so Alien for sure, obviously. I was just trying to think what other ones. Like, Blade Runner has people going to space as part of the story, although it doesn't happen in the movie. And then he's done Prometheus since. Wait, when was Prometheus? Prometheus was after The Martian, right? Gosh, maybe this
Yeah.
is. Well, let's see. Prometheus. Oh no,
2000.
it was before. Prometheus was 2012. Martian was 2015. Anyway, though, so I think we had ended up on this theme partly just because you had just rewatched The Martian independently, and I had just rewatched Sunshine independently, and so we kind of built it from there. So, what had inspired you to rewatch The Martian?
I had, while this little one that's fussing over here was
Mm-hmm.
being born, I read the most recent book by that author, Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian,
Right?
called Project Hail Mary. So I hadn't read The Martian, but I really enjoyed Project Hail Mary. Why? You just like, I'm on the phone? Um, so I wanted to rewatch The Martian because I was really curious. Because in Project Hail Mary, one of the biggest things is it's all like he's on his own, same
Mm-hmm.
as in The Martian. And so a lot of the humor and interesting stuff that happens is all internal monologue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's written. So I was trying to remember, I was like, I feel like The Martian had a lot of that, but and then after rewatching it, it's like, yeah, well, they created the video log so that they could have him essentially monologue,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So that I thought that was an interesting because again I haven't read The Martian, but my guess is that is not a prominent thing like just him recording himself talking
I don't remember
to the audience.
specifically. I think it actually makes sense logically that he would because he's trying, especially to start with, his assumption is that he's probably going to die there and he
Right.
needs to leave a record of what happened. Right?
Correct.
And that's the reason in the story, but I think it's just sort of a straightforward. It feels like something that a character would do, right? I did read The Martian. I don't remember specifically, but I think that he does do the logs in that way. I remember actually one of the things thinking about The Martian as a book and a film, adaptations. I remember feeling at the time that it came out, which was 2015, like they were an excellent pairing with each other. Uh, and specifically comparing that to Life of Pi, which I thought was also another excellent pair of a book and a movie that complement each other well by telling approximately the same story, but each making use of their mediums, uh, pros and cons. Oh my
Sorry.
goodness. Unhappy camper.
I don't think she's just gassy
Yeah.
because she's just acting really uncomfortable. She's not hungry. Like I had a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, had some bonus to see if she would drink it,
Mm-hmm.
and or she's just
Yeah.
being a brat because she knows I'm on the phone. Doesn't
Well,
want to pay attention to her.
those listening only to the audio are missing out. An excellent little tiny baby butt on camera right now. You know, clothed, but still. Um, in any case, so I think that The Martian is one of those really excellent pairings of book and movie because obviously what the book is more able to do is, even though he's doing the logs, there is a lot more interior monologue, right? Because it is kind of like you said, it's a lot of it is him just trying to think through how to solve the problems. And if I recall, it's been a minute. I read the book like prior to the movie coming out, not since then. But I believe that there is more of the stuff with Earth and what they're doing out there. There's more of that in the movie than there is in the book.
Right.
And more of it is just him in the book. And so you get a lot of that interior monologue, and there's also a lot more things that happen, like eventful things, especially during the long trips, the traveling thing. And so they cut out a lot of that, and then they give more stuff to the people who are on the ship and the people who are back on Earth, partly just because you've got a whole cast that you want to round out, and also because I think very wisely Ridley Scott was wanting this movie to borrow from one of the best remembered space movies that's been made, Apollo 13, which is, of
Yeah.
course, one of the other movies on our list here. Because I think if you're going to, the two movies that are most similar to each other in these four are certainly Apollo 13 and The Martian.
Yes.
Because of course, you have a space mission that goes wrong in a specific way, and then you have the rest of the story is everyone coming together both on the ship and back home to come together, solve all the problems in order to save the person who's or people that are trapped.
Right. In a creative way, yeah,
Yeah.
bring all the stuff to use in
Mm-hmm.
non-conventional ways. Yeah, all
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Very, very much, yes.
Problem solving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the I sometimes I hear people call it like competency porn, because it's something of a power fantasy when we sometimes in our real world feel like everything's chaotic and nobody knows what they're doing. It can be reassuring and fun in a fiction story to watch people be really good at their jobs and solve complicated problems, which of course does sometimes happen in real life. Apollo 13, after all, based on a true story.
Yep.
It's semi fictionalized, but mostly a true story. There's a few things here and there that are dramatic license, but that's entirely reasonable. But so we have those two that are both kind of doing the same thing. One, of course, based on a real incident, and one kind of looking ahead to a possible version of the future of human space travel, but otherwise telling very similarly structured stories. The primary difference just being that Matt Damon's character on The Martian is all by himself, and of course he's doing a lot more things because he's not trapped in just a tiny little capsule. So he's able to be out and about doing a lot more stuff, being a lot more active. Um,
Well, and the fun part, and he also has to figure out how to communicate, which, that's not one of the issues in the Apollo 13. Like they could always
mm-hmm.
speak to each other.
Right, right. And then and Gravity is similar in some respects, but it's kind of only one half, right? It is really only the people who are up in space. And there's an assumption that there are people down on Earth who are also trying to help, but we really don't even ever see any of them. We hear voices over the radio early on, but then lose even that pretty quickly. And so we're pretty much just focused on George Clooney and Sandra Bullock's characters up in space. Um, And boy, I tell you, rewatching this movie, I still think it's good, but it's just one of those things where you watch it today, even if you have a nice TV, and it just still doesn't completely replace the experience of being able to see it in IMAX 3D when it first came out in
Yes,
2013.
100%.
Because
Thought
that
the same
was
thing. Yeah.
something.
Yeah. I thought the same thing rewatching it, even though I've got a nice TV. Like you said,
Hmm.
it just doesn't, some of the stuff like that didn't, like some of the slower parts, like didn't feel as slow in the IMAX just because it
Hmm.
was so grand.
Right. Well, it was very much a movie designed for that experience. You know, one of the things that you really stands out when you're watching it not in 3D is how much of it is designed to be seen in 3D. Like, and it's not like you can't follow it or it's confusing or something like that, but then there's just a lot of stuff kind of coming and going from the foreground and the background, or rotating around
Right.
in the extreme foreground, and you just, it's like that is stuff that's designed to be seen in 3D. And of course, it was extremely effective in at that time. You know, this was 4 years after Avatar had kind of re-kickstarted the whole idea of 3D movies, and kind of reproved that the technology could be effective and impressive. And so you had a handful of other movies that actually kind of did some really exciting, interesting things with it, like this one. But even then, I think it was already kind of starting to taper off. You know, like people would see some movies in 3D, but it would be sort of almost like a flip a coin. Do you go to see the new one in 3D or not? But this
Right.
one was a big deal to see it in 3D.
Yeah.
And then, of course, our fourth movie that we kind of picked is Sunshine, which is shares some commonality generally, but it is distinct from the other three in the sense that it is not about a mission where something goes wrong and then you have to get everybody home safe. It's they are on a mission to save home, and it's explicit from pretty early on that they don't expect to ever be able to go home, and that they are going on what it will likely be a suicide mission in order to save back home, as opposed to the other three, where of course everyone back home is they're the ones that are safe.
Right. Well, and that it's an interesting compliment to the reading the Project Hail Mary
Mm-hmm.
as well, because that's the premise of Project Hail Mary is that the sun is also dying for a very different reason. It essentially gets like a parasite that
Mm.
is like pulling energy off of it. And we don't learn that it's a suicide mission though. That's one of the kind of the fun parts of that book is that the trip to where they're going to try to learn how to stop this
Mm-hmm.
is the coma that it puts him in is so deep that his two other crewmates die and he has amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
So he's having to kind of remember how like why he's there, what he and then then when he remembers that it's a suicide mission, like that's kind of a really dramatic and cool part of the story.
Hmm. So what
Not
the
but
coma
just
is
it's
that
very
this
it just yeah,
is.
just very much like it's handled differently, right? Like because in
Mhm.
Sunshine, like, they know that's a suicide mission, they've all signed up for it.
Well, it's
Signed up. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I think in Sunshine it's not necessarily known specifically that it's a suicide mission. It's they know it's possible, specifically because this is the second one after the first one didn't work. Like the first mission was sent to do the same thing they're doing, and lost contact, and so they know that at least once it's been tried already and failed.
Right.
They also know that the tolerances for risk are very low, and that they are one thing that they are all on board for, though, is that the priority is the mission over their lives, and so there's no sense of like, well, if you ever had to choose between being able to get back home and completing the mission, they have all, of course, signed up knowing that choice is decided already. But there is still kind of a sense of like, well, we're still planning to be able to get home if that's an option.
Right.
Yeah. But so we've talked a little bit like structurally about these four, and kind of the similarities and differences. Do we want to jump into a little bit more of a deep dive on the individual ones?
Yes. I'm sorry. This is usually her nap time. That's why I thought this would be a
That's
good time.
that's okay. It happens.
Also, part of why she's being so fussy is because she's not sleeping when she normally is, and so she's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly tired. I can see it.
Yeah.
I'm right here, and you're tired. You can make whatever face at me you want. Just go to sleep. Yeah, we can kind of deep dive into them.
Sure. So chronologically, the first of them that are made is Apollo 13, which also would chronologically be the first one to happen story wise, even though it's the only one that's like real history. But Apollo 13, made in 1995, directed by Ron Howard, starring Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton, Kevin Bacon, Ed Harris. Who else? Gary Sinise.
Yep.
And this one telling the true story of the ill-fated, but then the mission, the moon mission that wasn't. They had an accident midway through, and so the desperate situation is, can they be brought home? And of course, the real story is that they were, but it's something where it's an interesting little background plot of the movie where, even though Apollo 11 is the first mission where people landed on the moon, and this is only 2 missions after that,
Right.
and people are already tired of it.
Yeah,
And
forgotten about that part of the plot, right?
mm-hmm,
Where they're, like the kind of like almost sadness when they're like thinking they're on primetime TV
yeah,
and they're putting on this show and it's really just their family watching in the space station or space center.
right. Yeah, and part of the reason I brought that up is just that I think that although probably when this movie came out, I'm sure that lots of people knew about Apollo 11 is when we landed on the moon, but I think probably a lot of people, unless they were really kind of super nerds about space stuff, maybe didn't even know, didn't even remember about Apollo 13. And there's a little bit of an irony there, almost in the sense that like if they had died, people might have remembered it more.
Right.
Of course, because there have been, some space disasters like the Challenger explosion. But this was something where I don't remember knowing the story before I saw the movie. I didn't ever think that they were going to die because I figured that that's what this movie is that how do we save them? But still, it does such a good job of just illustrating that it's like, it reminds me of one of Tom Hanks's lines is kind of like, there's 1,000 things that we have to do in order. You're talking about 682 and we're on 7. And just the point being that there are so many different things that have to happen and problems to be solved, especially because they're not doing what was originally planned. So now you have to invent all of these new ways to try to handle whatever it is that you're going to do. And the line that really always does get to me, and I think it's a line that of course could have been very cheesy, but is given to the incomparable Ed Harris, is I think it's like a journalist or something that is asking him, is like, this is the greatest disaster that NASA has ever faced, and he says, I prefer to think of it as our finest hour. And I just it is what's so affecting in this movie is this coming together of all of these different people to solve problems and then managing to do it and doing it because it matters that these three guys survive, right? That everybody cares about that and that it's important and that all these people work together to make that happen. And like it's a moving story.
Yes, I mean, knew I enjoyed the movie. I knew it was a great movie. I knew it was a top movie. This was one like if we were still kind of messing around with the list, right?
Yeah.
This this could have potential to be on that top 100. I mean, it I don't know what I would take off, and I don't think we do that exercise. It's just I
Yeah.
was watching, it was like this is really good. Like it's touching, it's exciting, even when you know what's going to happen. Like you said, even the first time you saw it, you knew they were going to live, even if you didn't know the real story, right? Like you don't put Tom Hanks into this kind of movie for it to end in tragedy, right?
Right.
Like that's just not how it's going to come out, right? Especially in the 90s,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And
you
so
know,
even
it's
with that, it's
interesting.
still tense. Yeah,
Well, I was just going to say let's maybe just touch on Tom Hanks a little bit because Tom Hanks today is Tom Hanks, right? And it's not that we didn't know who he was in when this movie came out, but let's just like I'm gonna pulling up his filmography to just sort of put this in perspective. Toy Story had not happened yet. It happens later this year, in fact. Um, he had, however, just done Forrest Gump the year before, which of course was a big deal for his notability. He had done Philadelphia before, and so this is like this right here. This movie is like the crest of the wave of him becoming major movie actor. Like instead of just a guy who can lead a movie and
right.
mostly does comedies, this guy is major player, major, A-list movie star Tom Hanks is like this movie is just right there, and it's kind of like he, that plus the rest of this cast, I think it's mostly just it's a matter of like, it's such a good script, people wanted to make this movie.
Yep.
So I was just actually looking up to see what awards this one won. It was nominated for a whole bunch of things, including Best Picture, but it ended up only winning film editing and sound. Let's see, what was the Wikipedia's Wikipedia's list is not it's not as easy to jump between everything as I would always like. I was just going to see what so for Best Picture, it was nominated against Sense and Sensibility, The Postman, the Il Postino, Babe, and Braveheart, which of course Braveheart won.
Yes.
I think personally, looking back, I would give it to this over Braveheart. Personally,
Yes.
I think Braveheart was like a big deal when it came out, but I feel like maybe it's the Mel Gibson of it, but I feel like people don't really talk about it anymore.
Yep.
If anything, it's just the joke of the person with their face half painted blue riding on the horse in front of an army, right? Like you see a million versions of that. It's like a meme, but that's like the only thing people ever think about Braveheart for anymore.
Yep.
Um, but so it ended up really only winning the sorts of award categories that sci-fi wins. So it was a little early still for the Oscars to be willing to give the trophies to, quote, science fiction, even if it's based on a true story.
Yeah.
But, Ron Howard has, of course, made a lot of good movies, but I think this is one of his best. It's just, is really impressive how well it uses the effects, given that we're still pretty early on in adoption of CGI effects. You are not going to be able, the ability to try to depict as much zero gravity as is needed, even though, obviously a lot of it is kind of faked with them sort of just standing on these little platforms as opposed to doing the, like the vomit comet style. Uh,
Yep.
but given just how much like technical stuff has to happen in this, but the ability to pull as much drama out of these three guys in a very small space where they can't actually even move around very well, much less have things to do other than press buttons and flip switches. Um, it's kind of incredible how well it manages the tone, and that includes having these moments of levity, these moments of earnest character drama, the finding the little bits of irony in the real life history, things like Gary Sinise was originally supposed to be on the mission, but he was exposed to measles, and
Yes.
so they and you know and so he's back there, but then still keeping him around, and then the bit later on where he's talking to them on the radio and he's speaking in code to basically say, no, I didn't get the measles, just for and the little bits where like they have Fred Lovell, Tom Hanks's character, his mom, um, watching the TV, and to keep her company, they bring in, it's like, this is Buzz, and this is oh God, Armstrong. Um,
Armstrong.
I didn't hear you say the first name, which is what I was stuck on. Neil.
Neil.
That's right. God. Anyway, but yeah, so just this, kind of casually introducing these two actors we hadn't really seen on screen before that, and just saying, oh yeah, this is Neil Armstrong and this is Buzz, and she's just like, oh nice, are you boys in the space program too? And just finding these little moments to offer the comic relief.
So part of the fun of having a baby, I found out why she was fussy, is her tummy was upset.
Aw.
She has relieved herself of that, but now
Aw.
I
Now she's hungry again.
she needs to be cleaned.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Well.
I
So,
don't need to put that on the podcast.
well,
It doesn't take very long if you can.
I think I can ramble.
All right, I'll be right
Yeah.
back.
Okay. This is the price that you pay for daring to have real life intrude when you're trying to record podcasts. How dare? Um, but so in any case, I think that it's just a really good script, because Apollo 13, obviously the real story of the real mission, inherently dramatic in a number of ways, but not necessarily all of those things are cinematic. And especially because, as mentioned, you have the guys who are in danger, but, they're not able to really they're not able to run around and jump off of stuff. They're not shooting at things. Nobody's shooting at them. It is really trying to find all of this drama from them just floating in this very small space and figuring out how you can make that interesting when there's not necessarily a whole lot happening on screen. And it is just, I think, very effective in this movie, because compared to the other three, there's not a lot of on-screen action. It's all situational. It's all interior. It's dramatic. It matters what's happening, but the actual physical activity of it is pretty, simple. You have the launching of the rocket, but then you get stuff where they're having to find ways to make it visually interesting to do all the different stuff. So finding different ways to try to capture different angles of the guys in the capsule, the people back at the station, showing the quiet computer room where it's dark and there's the cots and people sleeping there. The excellent scene that's always very memorable to me as an engineer, the where they dump out all of the stuff on a big table and say, okay, well, we've got to find a way to plug this carbon dioxide scrubber into that carbon dioxide scrubber, the round filter into the square hole, using nothing but these things. And that scene always kind of stood out to me because when I was studying engineering at school, we had a couple of classes that were kind of like that, because that is what engineering is sometimes, figuring out, well, how do you solve technical problems like this? And just finding interesting ways to show that stuff, because again, it's like, outside of knowing that this movie is good and has an interesting scene with that, you could just describe to someone what that scene is like a bunch of nerdy NASA engineers all wearing identical short sleeve white dress shirts are having to look at a bunch of stuff and figure out how to plug one thing into another thing. It doesn't sound like it would be interesting, and yet that's what the excellent script and Ron Howard's direction managed to deliver here. And of course, part of what happens to make all of that work is to the great cast, and we get some, Tom Hanks, of course, is he is our lead. He is the central character. He's the one that we follow. We established all the stuff with his kid and his wife early on. Like, we get the moment where he's talking to his son about the mission he's about to go on, and his son asks him about the fire that had killed some of the astronauts on an earlier mission before it even got off the launch pad, and he doesn't try to lie to his kid. He's just like, well, a lot of things went wrong, and one of them was the door, that they couldn't get the door open when they needed to get out. And so later, that sets up this moment where, when Lovell's wife is having to tell her kids, well, something went wrong on your daddy's spaceship and he's going to have to turn around before he even gets to the moon. And the kid just says, is it the door? And it's such a simple line, and yet, because it's been set up at the beginning to have this dramatic weight of, what does the kid really mean? What is he really asking when he asks, is it the door? That is just good storytelling, and that's something that works on screen, but then you also have to have the cast that sells it. It has to fall in the right place in the movie, and the tone around it, when you're ready to have these quiet, sad, scared moments in between the scene sequences where we're excited by successes or thrilled by failures. You have to have these quiet moments too. And I think that's just one of the things that makes Apollo 13 so good, is that it manages that tone just exceptionally well.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you agree, off-screen co-host.
Yes. You seem much happier now.
Well, good. You know,
Oh, well, yeah,
that's
that's
how it goes sometimes. Just
yeah.
like Bill Paxton,
What?
because he threw up his meal when
Oh,
they
yeah,
got up in
that's
his
right.
face.
I shouldn't
Yeah.
throw up, but
Oh, I see. I see.
different kind of
Made
cleanup.
room the other way. I see.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Figuring the other way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know what? They presumably did that too. Um,
Yeah, you think it's so hilarious when Dad has to clean up your outfits because you blow them out.
But
Uh,
so, in any case, I think I've ended up kind of talking a fair amount about Apollo 13. Did you have
yes.
more that you wanted to say about it before we move on?
No, I could kind of hear you while I was upstairs, and yeah, you kind of covered all of the really important things. Like, there's just so many neat moments in that movie. Like, I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what I like, is that it's tense, it's entertaining, it's funny,
Mm-hmm.
touching. It's looks great, like you said, from a special effects standpoint, based on what they had. So all put together really well. Just a really
Mm-hmm.
well-made movie that's
Yeah.
fun to watch. Yeah.
There's just nothing to criticize about that movie. It's just got a cast at the top of their game, a director with excellent control over the tone, a good script, and then they managed to make the effects look really great for 1995 in such a way that it looks fine today. It's not even like some movies where you still kind of have to make allowances. It's like, well, it looks great at the time and it looks okay now. It looks just fine, right? Like there's nothing in it that really stands out as a bad effect today.
Right. Like you can tell the movie was from the 90s, but you don't say, "Oh, wow, if that was made today, that would look a lot
Mm-hmm.
different, cooler." It's just more of the color saturation and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, like movies looked at back then,
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and that's just style. That's not
yeah,
quality. But
correct.
so let's move next then to Sunshine, Danny Boyle's Sunshine, and of course this uh, I've been I had rewatched this one because I've been going through Danny Boyle's whole filmography, listening to one of the Blank Check podcast's old miniseries on him. And so Sunshine was one that I had seen before and had some mixed feelings about. But the guys on the Blank Check podcast really, really liked it. And so I was eager to kind of revisit it for myself. And I did find that I liked it a lot more on repeat viewing, but it's not quite as much of a home run for me as Apollo 13.
Yeah.
Um, I think that probably most people who have problems with it would agree that the problems are in the third act.
Yes. I I don't know if the right words disagree with the style choice of whatever the other guys, the villain.
Yeah.
I don't like watching it.
Yeah.
That sort of weird, distorted, jumpy. Like I understand why he did it. I don't like that's why I said I don't think
Mm-hmm.
disagree is the right word. I
Yeah.
don't that I
I think it's kind of I feel like there's something there that maybe kind of almost works. Like I sort of almost want to root for the idea, which is that like somehow this guy has become something more than human in such a way that like the effect that is used whenever this character is on screen, this distortion effect, is almost meant to suggest that somehow his very presence distorts the camera,
right.
which is kind of an interesting sort of meta approach because, of course, in the fiction of the movie, there's no camera. We're not talking about like the other characters trying to see him through a camera. Um, and then we could also imagine how that effect in the storytelling is kind of an interesting concept that is used to maybe cover for the idea that the makeup didn't necessarily look as much like they wanted it, or I don't know if even that's like the origin of it or if it was always supposed to be that way. But I agree that it kind of looks weird when you see it on screen, and I'm also just when you compare this story to the other three, I am just so much more engaged with the parts of Sunshine that are like the other three, which is smart people who are dedicated, working hard together to try to solve a serious problem. And I'm so much, in a very dangerous environment, right?
Right.
And I love so many of the visuals in this movie, and I like all of that part. And although there's parts of me that kind of are open to when I hear people talk about liking those parts of, the part of the movie where it, you know, to say it in an ungenerous way, it just becomes a slasher movie in the third act.
Right.
Um, but the people who like that part of it, what they like about it is not that it becomes a slasher movie. They like the sort of the philosophical piece of the idea that the sun is something that becomes like so big and so intense as you get closer and closer to it, that it just becomes this perception of like it's like God, it's like a God, or and it just really, like the human brain breaks in attempting to comprehend it.
Right.
And that is what is, this guy's deal, and that there are some interesting things and ideas around that idea, especially since we see some kind of early stages of that even with the characters on our initial mission, right? Like the psychiatrist character. Let's see, his which one? Cliff Curtis as Searle, the psychological officer. Is We can see him starting down that path on his own, even if he hasn't kind of gone completely off the over the edge to full madness yet. But I like some of that
Yeah.
conceptually. Um, and I like some of the visuals to the end, but I think the fact that it just starts feeling like a different kind of movie, and that although, interesting visuals aside, very little of the last like 20 minutes makes any kind of like logical sense. Like, it's just kind of like the the physics just kind of completely go out the window. And to some extent, they try to justify that as saying, like, there's a sequence early in the movie where they talk about like, oh well, when you get this close to the sun, kind of starts to break down. You never know what's going to happen, and will this thing even work? And then they've established that they've got a bomb that's like the mass of the island of Manhattan. And so like the idea is that they've got it in the shape of a cube for some reason. And so like there's a bit where, they walk to one corner and they hold someone out, and it's like it's a cliff, but then if you drop them, they sort of eventually are pulled towards the center again. And like some of that stuff, you sort of like, well, okay, I kind of guess I get what they're doing, but we're also watching them walk around on it like it's normal gravity. And we've also seen in the rest of the ship them walking around like there's normal gravity. And so it's kind of a matter of like, well, okay, well, is this ship have artificial gravity or not? Or is it being simulated? And it's kind of loosey goosey in a lot of that stuff. Um,
Yeah. It's like the concept that we've talked about before. I think you brought it to my attention. It's like, you can have, like, I think the way you've described it is like the one big lie or whatever. Like,
mm,
you can have one thing that everybody just has to assume is this is the world or this is the whatever.
yeah,
But when you start stacking too many things that don't necessarily make sense, even if you're just sort of waving your hands at them, it starts to lose it, right? Like, so
yeah,
if you already have started with a nuclear bomb can fix the sun,
mm-hmm,
right? Like, okay, we can just accept that, right? But then it's like, well, but getting to the sun kind of changes physics and visual. Like, we humans don't know what's going to happen when you get there. Okay,
mm-hmm,
kind of get that one too. And then it's like, oh, but it also changes your mind and your perception of God. And then it's like, and then these things don't work the way, but that's sort of like because things are
yeah,
different from the sun. And it's like you start to lose it
right,
a little.
yeah.
Yeah.
Part of what makes these kinds of stories exciting for me is this dynamic of making the audience think they know what's going to happen and then surprising them. But when you surprise them, it still makes sense, right?
Right.
It's the, oh, I didn't see that coming, but now that it's happened, of course that's what happened, right? And that is like the most satisfying kind of surprise in a movie where it, after the fact, it seems obvious. But I think towards the end of this one, there's a little bit too much stuff that just sort of feels like um, they just didn't want to actually take the time to like figure out how it would actually work, or that, or somehow like they didn't want to let any sort of physics question get in the way of like, well, I kind of want to be able to do this one image, and so we just need to we'll just do it regardless of whether we have any kind of a story reason for why it would be like that. And again, like I don't even want to over criticize in that stuff. It's more just a matter of like those things don't 100% work for me. But boy,
Right.
I think there's a whole lot of this movie that really does work great
Yeah, there's
for
some really
me.
cool stuff in it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
I mean, I think that like the whole let's see, how long is this movie? It's I think is relatively long, isn't it? Let's see. Well, I guess I'm wrong. It's 107 minutes, so it's not even 2 hours. But so like the whole first hour, I think I would say is just pretty great. There's some just really cool stuff with just the way that their ship looks. Like they have the gigantic sort of solar, shade that is simultaneously giving their ship power, but also like they are gonna get so close to the sun that their ship would be incinerated instantly if it were directly exposed.
Yep.
But that creates just this whole thematic scariness of like you can't look directly at the thing that you're. And I mean, that just goes to like the sun, right? Like the sun is so important to everything here on earth, except you're not supposed to directly look at
Right.
it, right? And it's a whole thing. And so this idea that they are going to the sun but can't even directly look at it. They have to be hiding from the thing they're going to.
Yeah, I like all that.
Mm-hmm.
I do love the the idea that looking at the sun in varying degrees of like exposure is like
Mm-hmm.
this, it's like a drug,
Yeah, yeah.
and that you like feel, and that's why I think I'm so frustrated with the end, because that's supposed to be the payoff, right? Is it like once you've gone to maximum exposure, you turn into this weird blip, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like I felt like there could have been a better payoff to that, because it's such a cool thought of like you're bathing directly in the sun at like
Mm-hmm.
slightly dangerous level.
Yeah. Well, also I think maybe part of it too is that our you know Killian Murphy is kind of ultimately our main POV character, right? I think it's not necessarily obvious right at the beginning of the movie that that's going to be true. It's played as much more of an ensemble for the first half hour or so.
Right.
But ultimately, Killian Murphy doesn't really engage with that aspect of the story at all, except in that he has to deal with this pinbacker guy once he shows up,
Right.
right? Like the idea of being fascinated and tantalized by this idea of the sun is just not that's not a theme his character engages with. So
Right.
there's no degree to which he and Pinbacker can share any element of commonality or understanding. Pinbacker is just a monster to him.
Right.
Whereas there are some of the other characters where you could have sort of an interesting dynamic there, but those characters don't end up having to deal with him. And ultimately, Pinbacker, although there's some interesting stuff, again, it's like the only characters who actually engage with any of that are dispatched pretty early once he shows up. So,
Right.
like, you
The
don't
ones who would
really.
actually listen to his like blowharding, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I feel so far like we're focusing almost entirely on the negative part, but I think it's only just in, at least for me, it's partly just because I wanted so much for the whole movie to be as much as good as much. I wanted to like the whole thing as much as I liked that first hour
Yeah, and I
because.
think that's kind of where I'm going to. That's why I brought it up with how much I enjoyed like that kind of
Mm-hmm.
unexposure thing, right?
Yeah,
Because it's,
yeah, it's such a neat idea, and like even just the first part where he's saying like that the Cliff Curtis character is like negotiating with the computer is like, can I look at it at 3%, and they say like you can
yes.
do 2.5% for 30 seconds, and he's
Right.
still like wearing like welder's goggles and stuff like that.
Yes. I love that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what I don't want to focus on the negative, but it's like it was frustrating that there's not a better payoff to that, right? Like
Yeah.
that ends in, well, you just become a monster and you're
Well,
weird.
yeah, it kind of
Yeah.
just like switches to cosmic horror. And I mean, it's kind of a cosmic horror plot line that's just layered over the rest of it, which is a more standard, like science fiction space adventure, you know? Because the rest of them, like, except for that whole thread of it, the rest of it is much more in line with Apollo 13, Gravity, and The Martian, right? It is the smart people working together to try to solve these problems, right? You know, because you have uh, you have a really interesting dilemma, like this first sort of, other than the big threat to the sun, the first initial dilemma is, well, we know that the first mission was lost, but on their way there, they end up detecting a signal from it. And so now there's a dilemma of, well, do we risk our mission to try to go check it out just because, do we do that, or do we just keep going as we should? And of course, you have several members of the crew who are very insistent on, like, why would we take any risks at all? There's no possible way anyone is alive there anyway. Why would we, our mission is so important. Why would we take any risks at all? And then you have others who are saying, well, like even if we're sure there's no one there, they do have a second one of these bombs that we hope will work, but we're kind of not sure. Don't you think it might be nice to have a backup?
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, there's something there to that, right? But of
Yep.
course, this is where we finally highlight, Killian Murphy as kind of our main character, because he's the guy that understands the bombs. So once the decision kind of comes down to that question, the captain basically puts it on him to just decide. It's not even like, oh, we're tied, you need to be the tiebreaker. The captain is just kind of like saying, no, we're going to do the best thing for the mission, which I'm deciding is decided by our physicist.
Right.
And it's established, even in that moment where he's just saying, listen, all I can do is guess. It might as well be the flip of a coin. But what they decide is to go. And then, of course, that is, it's the road less traveled. It's the sliding doors. It's like, well, what would have happened if they had not done that? I don't think they ever like
I'm gonna
decide
move
in the movie.
downstairs.
Okay. I don't think they ever decide in the movie that it, like, there's never a point where they say, oh, well, it's a good thing they did go because the bomb would not have worked the way it was, like they don't ever say that. But the you know from there you get the, like, well, oh no, Benedict Wong's character, he charts the, the change of trajectory right, but forgets that because you're going to be approaching the sun from a tiny, tiny different angle, you didn't adjust the angle of the solar shield quite right. And so, that causes just a little bit of damage, but then in trying to fix that, it ends up causing more damage. And then things just kind of start to spiral from there. And you start losing members of the crew. Um, Speaking of the crew, uh, as opposed to Apollo 13, where you've just got all of these incredible actors, that is like where almost everyone in the main cast is people that we know already from something big and famous, right? Whereas in this movie in 2007, you read the cast now and it's a bunch of huge names that were not all huge names when the movie was made. Like Rose Byrne, Cliff Curtis is, I mean, he's not like, he's a character actor who's been in lots of stuff. He's not necessarily the huge name, but you've got Chris Evans in here, who had already been in the Fantastic Four movies, but was not yet Captain America. You got Killian Murphy, who of course huge name now. Benedict Wong, but Michelle Yeoh. And then Hiroyuki Sanada is, like he's one of those guys where maybe a lot of people in America don't necessarily know his name, but you see his face and you're like, oh yeah, that guy. And so it's just a great cast, and everyone's doing interesting stuff with their roles. I kind of really like Chris Evans's character specifically because he is written to be the guy who is an asshole, but also probably right every time he opens his mouth. Like he's
Yes.
the one saying, "What are we doing? This is a terrible decision. You're all making this worse. What? Why can't we just do what we were originally supposed to do?" And it's like every time he opens his mouth, it's kind of like, well, yeah, he's being the bad guy in the moment, but also he is kind of right, I think. And then like so lots of interesting stuff there, and then you just get everyone with fun stuff to do. Like they give every member of the cast some interesting things. So obviously, this is the part of the movie that I like. I love the most because it's this trying to solve problems. Like, oh, you have to rotate the sun shield to put some of it in the shade so that you can walk out and fix some of the panels on it. And again, some of that stuff is a good example of like, I don't care why the solar shield has the weird little panels on it. Like, why does it work like that? That doesn't matter. Like, I'm not hand wringing about like what are the physics of that or how did they build that. That's all just that's like when you mentioned like the big lie to start with is that they've already built this thing, right? Um, but like just it's established well enough for us to understand visually what is happening and what is the threat. And so when you realize, oh no, because they're rotated so much, it's starting to cause problems over in the other end. So the ship starts to take control and put it back to where it's oriented right. But then are they going to be able to finish fix the damage in time to get back behind the shield and all of that stuff? And just all of the visuals of this are just incredible. And it's so fun, and it's layering in some of the interesting character stuff, like when the captain is literally he has decided to basically sacrifice his life to finish fixing this panel and to save Cillian Murphy's life because Cillian Murphy is the only one who can run the bomb. But Cliff Curtis gets on the radio and is like, as the captain is about to be incinerated by direct exposure to the sun, Cliff Curtis, who's been, Searle, who has been the one obsessed with looking at the sun, is like, what do you see? What do you see? And like, he is so obsessed at this point that he is making his captain's heroic self-sacrifice all about like himself and like his own obsession.
Right.
And it's just these interesting little details in there.
Right. And see, that's, I think, going back to what I was talking about, like that's where that's where it's starting to pay off, right? Like
Yeah.
where you're changing the dynamic of how that scene works because the guy's so obsessed with like, almost like I wish I was out there so that I
Mm-hmm.
could see this, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And then I think that there, if I could point to a specific instant where I feel like it starts to go a little bit wrong, it's when they finally rendezvous with the other ship and they go on board and there's this weird dust all over everything, and one of them repeats this myth that's like, oh, 80% of dust is human skin cells, which is like, no, it isn't. It's not true. I mean, what are you talking about? That's like a myth. That's like a schoolyard myth. That's not true. Like obviously, humans do shed a lot of skin cells, and in certain circumstances, it like dust might in a very populated area might have a lot of skin cells in it, but it's not just true that generically 80% of dust is human skin cells. That's just nonsense. So like I don't know, I have a pet peeve about that. So as soon as you say that line, I feel like a little bit of a red flag of like, wait, something's not going right.
yeah.
But even still, I think at this point we still have a lot of the same sort of interesting stuff of like the mystery of like, well, what happened here, and trying to figure out what happened on the ship. And we get a little bit of like haunted house ghost story mode for a little while. I am a little bit of a sucker for, exploring haunted spaceships, that sort of thing, like, Dead Space or something like that, or Alien for that matter, right? Um, and so some of that still works. You get like the whole stuff with the airlock, and so there's a lot of good stuff still. But again, this is just where it starts. We encounter the videos of Pinbacker, who had been going mad and who killed the rest of the people on his mission. And so from then on, you still got a lot of really cool visuals, but the plot kind of becomes primarily in service to the visuals,
Yep.
after that. And those visuals are beautiful. Also, good score in this movie, for sure too. And there's a lot. And so in rewatching it, I kind of hoped that I was going to be fully converted to just absolutely thinking the whole movie's a masterpiece, like these two blank check guys do, but I couldn't quite get there. I liked it a lot more than I did the first time, because the first time I felt more like, boy, that was a good movie until they ruined it at the end. I was more forgiving this time, but I still don't think it entirely works.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. So Gravity is a movie, that I do feel like, we touched on this already earlier, of just this. It's hard to watch it now, remembering what it was like to see it in IMAX 3D, or even just 3D, if not IMAX. But that was just so much a part of that initial viewing experience that feels almost impossible that you would have a more negative experience the first time and then like it more rewatching in this circumstance.
That's kind of, again, like I said, that was my take, is that it felt slower.
Mm-hmm. There,
Not
yeah.
disturbingly, like not like I was like, oh, this sucks now.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like it just didn't have the same like
Yeah, there's a lot of it that, feels almost in real time. Um, and I think there's a lot of it that, I mean, I still think it's a great movie. I had a great
I
time
agree.
rewatching it. But you can't help but notice how much of it still, it's like, oh, I bet this looked great in 3D, is the sort of feeling you have with some of these long shots.
Yes.
Um, and so it is kind of slow in that regard. And I think one of the things that although it's still got this great survival element to it, I think it's an interesting choice to have it focus just on, the smaller story of the people in space. Like, George Clooney's there along for the ride for the most part, but we're still kind of really with Sandra Bullock's character, right? That she is who we're following, and it's just that he's also there for a bit.
Right.
And so instead of having the whole ground crew or a whole ship crew that all have to work together to solve these problems, it's kind of putting it all on her. Like, he's given her a hand up for a while, helping her get under control and kind of reframing things for her so that she is able to, um, keep going when all seems lost. But mostly it's ultimately just about her. And in the end, I think it's fun to realize at the end that, because the running theme throughout, kind of like you touched on with the video logs from The Martian, of like, is you know talking in the blind over the radio, because you're not hearing anything back from Houston, but you're broadcasting in the hopes that someone can hear you even if they can't talk back. And I think, as Clooney puts it, is kind of like, because the person you can't hear talking back might just save your life if they know what's happening. And of course, that is what ends up happening. We don't ever get any acknowledgement at all from them until the very end, when, our assumption is that she's going to get rescued. I feel like You know what? I'm just suddenly remembering, like, I don't think we ever actually see that. Maybe that's just entirely in my head.
What the
That someone finds where she comes down to rescue her at the end. I'm suddenly remembering. Is that actually explicit on screen, or is that just entirely my assumption?
No,
Is
it's not on screen. She just like she like crashes in that lake or whatever, right? Oh no,
yeah,
yeah, they do. There's I just looked it up. The radio says they've tracked her.
right. Yeah. See, so that's I yeah I was remembering that there was something. So
Yeah.
this idea that uh, that they were listening that whole time, or at least as much as they could, and because they were able to come find her once she lands. So even though they she wasn't ever didn't ever know for sure, it's it's interesting because it really dovetails, of course, with the whole theme of prayer in the movie, right? Because Sandra Bullock's character is not religious. We learned that she lost her kid just to an sort of ordinary tragic accident. And there's just a discussion of like what it means to pray, and so she kind of sort of tries it a little bit later, but it's the sort of like I don't know if anybody's listening, but in this, it's very much sort of presented as a parallel to this whole idea of trying to talk to Houston on the radio, even though you don't know if they can hear you or if it matters or anything's going to come of it. And so I think there's some interesting uh, theme stuff happening there.
Yeah, because I think that's part of the power of prayer, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
there's a comfort in you sharing that, whether or not there's a direct payoff to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's comforted by the fact she's talking to Houston, whether or not they are listening or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sort of, again, it's not saying that, like, it's not overtly like, see, God is listening, right? Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not doing that at the end,
Right.
but it's like, yeah, but also if you do believe this and you do believe that they're listening and you get the immediate comfort, but there could be the payoff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so it kind of lets you
Yeah.
take it at your own speed, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and then there's a little bit, it's the two things as parallels of one another, but also there's it's a little bit like the whole story about like the person in the flood who's praying for God to save them is like, well, I sent a rowboat and a helicopter,
Yes.
that whole sort of thing, right? But it's the plot is pretty basic, right? There is what we learned, like what causes the problem is that the Russians, in attempting to destroy one of their own spy satellites, so that presumably no one else can like recover it, um, accidentally create a cloud of debris that has a devastating destructive result on a space shuttle mission that was up there trying to repair the Hubble. Um, and that kills almost everybody on the space shuttle mission except Sandra Bullock's character and George Clooney's character. And then the rest of the movie is them trying to find some way to get home. And eventually, Clooney's character sacrifices himself for her survival in my least favorite part of the movie, specifically just because in a movie that I think by and large does all this stuff extremely well, depicts that one particular moment in a way that makes no sense at all to me. It makes no physical sense why, like it, because it looks like she has stopped his momentum away, and it's just a matter of trying to pull back to go further up. But no, he insists on disconnecting himself because he is somehow continuing to pull her away, even though we can see on screen that that's not happening.
Right.
And it frustrates me every time because I just sort of feel like I understand how it would be tricky because you want them to be able to have the whole conversation about it. But I feel like, as depicted on screen, it looks like he does it for no reason. And we have to take his word for it that it's not for no reason, but visually, it looks like it's for no reason. And that just irritates me. um,
I mean, you're right. It is odd,
yeah.
and it's just yeah, like it's one of the parts where like the fact that the movie is so stylistic goes a little sideways, right? Like,
Yeah.
because your point, they're trying to have this closeness between them to have this conversation to make this dramatic moment that
Mm-hmm.
requires them to be a certain way, and then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, but now that didn't, like you said, that didn't make sense. I feel like there was another way out of that.
Yeah, and like I really don't even I don't object at all conceptually to the story beat of there is a situation where he realizes that she can survive but only if he lets go. But I just don't buy the way they depicted it on screen. It
Right.
doesn't it doesn't make visual sense in a movie that by and large does that stuff extremely well, and it's kind of all the more frustrating because there's so many other places where they're depicting very complicated things happening in a way that's very easy for us to track and follow in an exciting way, and we just get it. And then there's this one crucial moment where a big plot development happens in a way that doesn't make sense to me. And it's again, it's kind of like if you think through it, it's like you can maybe sort of like squint and try to find a way to understand what he's talking about, but it just doesn't read on the screen. Um, but that said, like all of this, like lots of good stuff comes from it. Just like the fact that even once that decision point is made and he releases, like there's like you can still hear him on the radio for quite a while. Like he's still got air. She was running low on oxygen at this point, but he wasn't. And
Right.
they're still in radio distance communication for a while. And so I think that that's an interesting dynamic. Reminded me a little bit of The Abyss, honestly. Um, just the part where he goes down on the mission, um, to go down into the abyss. But the other part that I really like with him, though, is the part where he appears to return having survived just so they can have another conversation. And it's a dream sequence. And I think it reads as a dream sequence immediately. I don't think I imagine there's maybe some of the audience that doesn't necessarily get right away that she's imagining it. But I feel like it plays in such a way that it works whether you get that right away or not. What do you think?
I mean, I feel like it was fairly obvious that it was a dream sequence,
Yeah.
but like I think you're right that even if you didn't, like it still works, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Because
think
you just get the payoff in a different way, right? Like once you
yeah,
realize it's a dream sequence and you're like, oh, okay, like it's because it's commenting on the psychological part of being alone now.
right. Um, I think the real tell for me is that he opens and decompresses the chamber she's in, and then climbs in and closes it, and everything's fine. Like that's the part that doesn't make any sense. Also, just like it does, it's a development that comes out of a different movie, right? The idea that, oh no, it turns out he did actually find a way to get some extra juice to his thrusters, and he actually followed her here, and it's um, I'm reminded actually because I've been going through Danny Boyle's stuff. I just recently rewatched 127 Hours, which has a similar sequence where it starts off with a whole thing where like he hears some thunder, so maybe there's a thunderstorm, And then there's some water coming in, and then oh look, the water is loosening the rock, and then all of a sudden he's imagining this whole sequence of events of he gets free, and here's how he makes his way home, and he gets into the car, and he's driving, and he gets all the way home. But it's just it's so clear we're watching him imagine all of that happening. But I love the conversation they have because this is the point where she doesn't want to die, but she just doesn't know what to do, and she's kind of giving up, right? Like it's she feels like, well, I mean, I've tried everything I can think of, and I don't know what to do, and so I guess this is all there is to do. But he basically is able to just kind of say, well, okay, but like take a moment, and maybe there are some things you could do. So like if you're not quite so quick to give up, and you let yourself kind of think for a minute, it's like, well, what if you tried this? What if you tried that? And and then just gets her back in that frame of mind. I really like that scene.
Yes, I agree.
Hmm. Uh,
Um,
so I know there. So for me, I thought this movie was just like very exciting and thrilling. But I know a lot of people who really like straight up saw this as like a horror movie. Like people who maybe have more fears of like the idea of like a phobia of being lost in space or something like that. I know I talked to people who thought this movie was terrifying, like in an like actual like scary way that was upsetting to them.
Interesting.
I take it that was not your reaction.
No.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking just in particular of a lot of people I talked to whose reaction to seeing this movie was, I would never go to space because like this is so scary. And I kind of can't help but thinking it's like, well, I mean, yeah, like what's happening in the movie is scary, but I feel like, but you got to go to space though.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, like, and their point, I think this movie does a really good job of highlighting the kind of non-sexy dangers of being in
Hmm.
space that are, you know, are scary, right? Like,
Hmm.
and the Martian, which I'm guessing about to get to,
Yeah.
utilizes a lot of this, but more for the like it's much more exciting, right?
Hmm.
Like it's there's this level of danger that you see that's out there about, hey, if you're off by this much or you don't have this, and it's like, but it's not as like terrifying as like, oh, if I miss, then I'm just gonna drift until I just suffocate,
Well,
right?
except for that very last sequence.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
even that's the sequence I'm actually
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
referencing is it's done in a different tone,
Hmm.
right? Like because of sort of the self-deprecating
Hmm.
dark sarcasm that like kind of comes with it. Like it just has a different
Yeah, like
feel. Like there's a
the movie has told a story up to that point where we are confident he's going to make it and be okay, even if we're not sure how, right? And
right, but
whereas
even
Gravity feels, I think, more, I think we are more worried that she might not make it in Gravity.
for her, yeah, I'm speaking specifically about like the one I think what at least, and maybe this isn't for everybody, but like what I feel like is one of the big fears is like being out there and like missing, right?
Hmm.
Like the drifting part
Just
and like
tumbling off into space and no one
tumbling
can
off into
save you.
space, right?
Yeah.
Where your suit's going to keep you alive
Hmm.
as long as it's going to keep you alive, and there is nothing like you basically just know you're dying for a
Hmm.
very long time,
Yeah.
and that's how gravity treats it,
Hmm.
right? Whereas yes, the same concept is going to happen at the end of the Martian if they miss,
Hmm.
but it's not done with the same like terrifying way. It's like there's stakes to what's happening that are very
Hmm.
serious that make it exciting, but not like, again, also because he doesn't miss, which obviously gravity, he does drift off and tumble
Yeah.
off into space and die.
Yeah.
But
I
it's
think.
taking those so that's why I like what the Martian does is take those very real stakes and make it more entertaining and exciting as opposed to like uncomfortable and scary, which again
Mhm.
to me it's not terrifying, but I can see why people take it that way because it's delivered with a very different tone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Because I think that's maybe gets at why some people really sort of reacted to Gravity like as a horror movie, right? You know, it's just it really does feel like everything is terrifying, and it's really kind of, at least for a long time, you know, like Sandra Bullock's character doesn't even really want to be there, right? It's established in the movie that she's not even like normally like desiring to be an astronaut, but that she was sort of specially trained for this specific mission because they're installing like one of her systems she designed under the telescope.
right? Like they're almost like taking the whole like school teacher thing from the Challenger and
Yeah.
like dialing it up to like a legitimate like
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? But
Yeah.
she's like that type of
Right. Yeah.
astronaut. Yeah.
But in any case, it is George Clooney's character that loves it, right? And I think it's fun for him to be able to give her a piece of that, you know, because there's what part of what I think is really exciting about it is the idea that, and this is based on I think what a lot of real astronauts have said, which is that space is exciting, but the real thing that it makes you love is the Earth, right? Like, you know, when you go to space and you see the Earth as just one big thing instead of a million places, and you know, different people and different fighting, and it's like, no, the Earth it is one place, and it's just the love that you have for the Earth. And I think that that's part of what makes the scene where she connects to like the Chinese shepherd or whatever that guy is. I don't remember the details of who he was, but let's see if this but yeah, so and with an Inuk on Earth is what this is. But just that scene where like the two of them can't really communicate in any specific detail, but just this, like, she's hearing like animal sounds and then a crying baby, and it's just this moment of connection where even if he can't understand her, she can't understand him. He can't help her in any meaningful way, but it is just a connection. It's just a moment of her not feeling so completely alone. It's such a wonderful scene. And then, of course, even though the very first thing Earth tries to do when she gets back is kill her with a lake, it's still this moment of it, you know, it's played as kind of like this moment of rebirth, right?
Yeah.
Where she has a whole new appreciation for it after her adventure. So, anything else we want to say about Gravity? Let's see. What
No, I mean,
it's just
I'm just going to tie that last piece together. That again, if you're taking it from the prayer Christian theme, that's kind of her baptism rebirth.
mm-hmm,
That's why she rises from the water like that. Like he's just given enough there that if you want to take it, you
mm-hmm.
can have it.
Yeah,
Not hitting anybody over the head with it.
yeah. It was nominated for a whole bunch of Oscars, of course. Um, I I think it was one of the rare years where it won Best Director but not Best Picture. Yeah. Alfonso Cuarón won Best Director, but 12 Years a Slave won for Best Picture. Um, that was, and then it had a whole bunch of other nominations, but I don't think it won a whole lot else other than the technical stuff. But of course, technical stuff is kind of a big part of what it was so impressive about it. Like, it was good, but like so much of this movie is all about doing all of that space stuff and the 3D of it and everything. I will say though that it won the best music, and I can vouch for that. Literally, the Gravity soundtrack has been on my playlist for writing music for a long time, like ever since the movie came out.
Nice.
Because it's got some just great slow burn, like tense stuff in it. So, we ready to come back around full circle to the Martian? We ready to bring him home, like the poster says?
Yes. And I mean, kind of the irony of this is like I love this movie and I could talk about it forever, but like we've spent so much time on the other three that I
Hmm.
mean, not that we don't need to rush
I
it,
mean,
but at the same
we
time, like,
touched on some, like we talked about a lot of the themes and like did like
yeah,
comparisons. So like we don't necessarily have to go quite as deep because we've kind of talked around a lot of the stuff. I liked revisiting it. One, this just to just kind of toss a nitpick in though right away, and this is not even like a nitpick of the movie so much as just the way that movies age and everything. Is that the quips and the one-liners? Although I think Matt Damon does them just fine. I like Matt Damon, but the one-liners, the jokes, just started to get real old for me.
really,
Yeah, and I think it's not even this movie's fault. It's just that like every movie did this for a while. You know what I mean? It's like especially I think people tend to cite the MCU movies, and you haven't watched all of those, so maybe that's part of why you were. I mean, you're not quite so over it, but it's just like this style of humor. The maybe there's an edge of a little edge of sarcasm in there, but mostly it's just about just doing these little quips and one-liners, and it's just I kind of felt like there's a little bit, maybe a few too many of them, and they're a little too clever. Like the whole thing bit about being a space pirate, and I'm the best botanist on on Mars and that sort of thing. Like they're fine individually, but I just like by the end I think it's again it's not this movie's fault. It's just that it's the hundred other movies that have come out in the last 10 years that joke just like this.
yeah, I'm wondering because I loved it, and I'm wondering if,
I love the movie. I'm only criticizing the jokes right now.
yeah, and so I think maybe part of it is again my recency with having read Andy Weir's work because no,
mm.
obviously I know the jokes aren't necessarily all in the book because I'm reading the other
There's a
book.
lot of them that are yeah.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot, and I I find the tone in the book really funny,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like there's a there's just a whole sequence. I don't know how much you know about it. I don't like some of the stuff is not huge spoilers, but like he does encounter
Mm-hmm.
extraterrestrial.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know
It
that.
happens in like the first 50 pages, right? Like it's
Okay.
right at the beginning. Like once he wakes up, he looks around and there's another ship that's like matched his ship's orbit. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, this can't be by accident, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the payoff is that he actually does get to interact with it, which is why I'm very curious to see how that movie is going to be done because that's coming out
Um.
this year or next year with Ryan
Yeah.
Gosling. Um,
I'll find it out. No, I think it's slated for 2026.
okay.
Yeah.
So
March.
a significant part of the book, he does interact with an extraterrestrial,
Mm-hmm.
and it's phenomenal in the book. I'm very curious how they're going to visually depict this. I know we have a lot of skills in this, but
Mm-hmm.
the it's just very clever in how it's all done. But anyway, like there's this one part. So the point is like what he eventually figures out, which again not a huge spoiler, is that the other guy is also the only guy, whatever it's kind of unclear, is
Mm-hmm.
also the only surviving member of his ship. But he's essentially the handyman, like the mechanic. So he knows a lot, but he's
Mm-hmm.
not a scientist. And so like they're working together with two completely different communication systems and bodies and all this kind of stuff. And our main character is there only because he's a scientist. He is not an astronaut.
Mm-hmm.
And the other guy is only there as the guy who knows how to like fix stuff. And just the fact that like there's this whole joke about like how the guy just like carries around all this junk, right? Because he's
Mm-hmm.
just got all these like things to fix stuff. And so when they eventually like move into the same ship, it's like oh, he's taken up about three-quarters of the dormitory. Well, he himself hasn't, but his junk's everywhere, right? Like, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, I don't know, it's just very funny. Like, it's not what you expect, right? Like, the
Mm-hmm.
guy's dealing with an extraterrestrial and he's making jokes about how
Oh,
the guy
sure.
has a bunch of
Yeah.
shit with him.
And well, and to be clear too, I think Martian the book is funny, and I'll also say I did not react this way to the jokes when I first saw it. I'm at pains to clarify that it is not the movie's fault that it was made in 2015, just as this exact style of humor started being in everything, at
Yes.
least to my
So,
perception.
right. So I'm not arguing
Yeah.
with you that you all of a sudden should like these jokes. I think what I'm more kind of exploring why it doesn't bother me as much.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, like you said, I haven't seen the Marvel ones where that's
Yeah.
very prevalent. But number two, it was fun to kind of watch a humor that I had just really enjoyed that was unexpected. Like I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think about that was going to be in like a sci-fi space book. Like just some of these funny things that are very,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very he's very direct, but very, but it just and like you probably read again if you remember the book The Martian, like I'm sure it weaves into the kind of the tapestry of the book like
Mm-hmm.
much cleaner,
Oh yeah.
right? And you're kind of laughing at points where you're like, oh, I didn't realize I was going to laugh right now, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean that's a
Yeah.
big part of what's great about the book is it's in Mark Watney's voice, and so the way he talks, like that's the narration of the book.
Yeah. So I was like kind of more living in that,
Yeah.
like not he's not this character making jokes at me, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm living his voice because I was able to kind of transfer
Yeah, and,
the other novel
yeah,
style.
and I'm not blaming even any individual joke. It's more just like I think I was just yeah. I so in any case, I really liked the movie. I had a great time rewatching it. I didn't want to
Yes.
like make it
Well, I
sound
just
like
think
that ruins it or something.
no, and I didn't take it that way. I did find it amusing that two of my favorite jokes were the ones that you referenced.
Yeah,
But you didn't reference them as that you didn't like the joke, right? Like
I
it was
think
just like very
it.
obvious
I
examples.
sort of
Yeah.
just felt like if there was, like, I'm making up the number here, but like if there were 8 of them, I wish that there were 5 of them. That kind of thing. You know what I mean? I think it's just there's maybe it starts to feel a little bit like a repeated beat. Um, I because I get it's fundamentally part of the character that this is how he reacts to stress, right? And I like that. I think Matt Damon's great in the movie. I like Matt Damon. I think he delivers those things well. And it's uh shoot, what was I just gonna I don't know. I'm kind of this issue. I'm dovetailing in my head with I saw someone else recently make a criticism of this movie that I was annoyed by because they were purporting to be like, well, I know real science and I know that there's no way that a human being could have survived on only potatoes for as long as they show in the movie. And I'm like, but it's not only potatoes. It's shown in the movie that he's using the potatoes to extend the other food rations he has. It's not only potatoes for that whole time. He's using potatoes to stretch out the rest of the food.
Yes.
Not to mention all of the other vitamins and supplements and stuff that they have on there because people were intended to survive there for a while. So that was annoying because like they were annoyed by a plot point that is explained in the movie, and that like I can't stand that kind of cinema sins movie analysis.
Right. Because it's also why he didn't die as soon as the potatoes were gone, because he still could eat. The potatoes were just making it last to where he needed it to last.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so clear. Yeah.
Yeah. But in any case, I kind of just got distracted there. But I like I think the movie does a great job of just part of what it does as a companion to the book is although like less stuff happens and we spend less time inside his head, it's able to actually show us these landscapes in a way that you can really only just imagine in the book. And just like the viscerality of when he's like going up in the rocket, at the end and in space, like that stuff just plays on screen really effectively in a way that's a little harder to imagine, I think, in a book. So I think they go together really well. And I think all of the additions of all the stuff that's happening on Earth and on the ship, I think that stuff works really well too. I think that's, they've got some fun stuff in there, even if a lot of it does. Again, and this is not a criticism, it's very obviously cribbing from Apollo 13, you know.
Yes. The other thing that I really liked, and again, I'm going to have to keep talking about it through the lens, which is part of the point of
Sure.
why we watched this.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the fact that like every time that he thinks, which is a little different than Apollo 13, right? Like
Mm.
and very different from Project Hail Mary is that almost every time that he gets a solution, like a curveball comes, right? Like
Yeah.
it's it's a steady beat of like, oh, we solved this, but then this happened, and now it's like now that's not a solution anymore, and we
Yeah.
got to start over or we got to fix it, like and like that sort of and I think that's part of why I like the lightheartedness because that could be very ominous to the point
Mhm.
of like gravity and very defeating of like, well, I had this solved and then
Mhm.
now it's ruined and it's
So
ruined forever, you know?
one thing that I really like about the story, and this is true of the book as well, and this is just as a direct comparison to some of the criticisms I was making about Sunshine, is that Andy Weir really writes with an engineer's mindset. I don't remember if he literally had engineering training, but I would not be a bit surprised. And I don't know. This is the only book of his that I've read, so I don't know that it's exactly like this in the others. But in even though not everything in it is probably pure normal real world physics that would work exactly as depicted on screen. I mean, there's license, but by and large there's a lot of thought given to this is how these things would work and how we're going to depict them and show them. And then the things that go wrong feel like things that would go wrong or could go wrong in ways that are presented as feeling there's a verisimilitude to it, as opposed to some of the stuff towards the end of Sunshine where it just sort of feels like, well, I guess that's how it works, I suppose, because that's what I'm seeing, but I don't understand why it would be like that, right? Whereas in he's going to science the shit out of it, which is another one of the um but
That one I don't like as much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I
and
didn't
again,
find that one.
it's just a
Yeah.
little bit like it's just extremely 2015 style
Yes.
humor, right? But he, all the different things that happen, like he's trying to make a thing to get water out of the, he's trying to combust hydrogen and that has a predictable outcome when you don't do it just exactly right. And then the ordinary things of just like, well, you've set up a fairly complicated situation and it took a lot of damage and sometimes materials fail. And that's, so it's like the curveballs that happen don't feel like they come out of nowhere. They feel like they've been given thought about what would happen, how it would happen, and what you do about it. And I really like that. Another series of books that I think does that well is the Silo books, which became a good TV show that also does that, in my opinion. But
Yeah. Yeah, and so those things don't really happen in Project Hail Mary.
mm,
It's a very different tone, right? Because like I said, it opens with the amnesia.
mm-hmm,
Gravity, once he realizes of the situation that he's there to try to save the sun, trying to figure out what exactly he's supposed to be doing there, and then he runs
mm-hmm,
into this other guy who's also there to do that for his planet. And so much of the book is like trying to like understand like because everything works on the ship. Like there's no like grave danger on the ship. It's just like, okay, now that I'm here and I've got this problem to solve and I've got this other person that I need to figure out how to communicate and maybe work with,
mm-hmm,
like how do we solve those problems? And those are very
yeah,
different problems to solve, right? And it's just a different, completely different tone, right? Like they're never in, not never, but it's not significantly like where like, oh, I had this thing that was a solution and I thought I had this thing solved and then it got fucked up because things happen, right? Like it's
mm-hmm,
not, it's much more of a slower burn. Um, so I enjoyed watching now that I'm kind of familiar with Andy Weir's tone a little bit better and his kind of style, watching a different like just the way the movie was put together differently.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
liked the curveballs and like that
Yeah.
kind of imminent danger that's not really there's not an imminent
Yeah,
danger in
I
Project
think
Hail
it's
Mary.
really
There's a
well translated.
yeah.
Like I was saying from the beginning, I think it's this movie and that book are very good supplements to each other.
Well, I'm hoping the same for the other books, but
Yeah.
I'm I'm just very nervous about how much of the book is him like learning to solve this problem with an extraterrestrial and like how is that going to work, right? Like
Well, it's interesting because I note that the directors attached are Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who have made some great movies that are not necessarily the sorts of movies you would expect to be this. Do you recognize them right away?
no.
The Lego Movie, 21 the 21 and 22 Jump Street, the ones with Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum. The Lego Batman movie, Solo before it got taken over by Ron Howard. The Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs animated movie.
Interesting.
The Spider Verse movies.
So lots of animation.
Yeah,
I hope that helps.
not only animation, but largely like lots of comedy.
Yep.
Lots of like comic style adventure, and less so like serious science fiction.
Well, that's the thing. Is this book like there's a seriousness to the science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I love it so much. Is it's that it's not. It's pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like him learning to communicate with the alien is amazing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's so funny and so. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I won't even get in because
All
again, then you start to get into spoilers because it's
right.
like
Sure. Yeah. Well.
because it's not like it's just a human, right?
Yeah.
That
No. I. No. Yeah. I can imagine. But so in any case, if we're maybe done talking about
yeah.
Martian, we need to decide what we're gonna watch for the next time. And because we didn't really plan a specific, uh, you know, idea in advance, do we want to just pick movies from that Sight and Sound list again?
So we could. I had one thing. We don't need to do this, but I'll just throw it out there to see your response to it.
Sure.
Um, have you been watching the new show on Netflix, The Waterfront,
No.
or have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
So it's done by Kevin Williamson,
Okay.
who did Scream. I Know
Mm-hmm.
What You Did Last Summer.
Yeah.
Like some of these like 90s funny slasher humor.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about those movies because I was
Okay.
watching a show by Kevin Williamson. So
Is it like is Waterfront like those?
no, not
Okay,
at
I
all.
was gonna say I wasn't. Yeah. Um, I let's. Do you know like which ones you would want to do?
I mean, I would definitely want to do Scream, and I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't looked much deeper than that.
You know what? Let's pick one more of those then. Uh,
So what
gosh,
else you got?
what are the other like the good ones and not the ones that are like just deliberately trashy?
That's what I'm kind of trying to figure out here.
Yeah.
Well, we could watch Dawson's Creek, um, which that
um,
is actually probably it's not Waterfront's not like any of those, but you can see his once you realize he's the guy that was making it, you're like, oh, even though it's not like any of that.
mhm.
Um,
Well, okay. So,
the
you
faculty
know,
I liked, but
how about Final Destination?
even though that's not his, just as a
Well, I mean, do we want? Oh, I guess I didn't process that you wanted it to be Kevin Williamson specifically.
I that's just how I like
Okay.
clicked it, but I'm fine with doing that as like a movie inspired by what he did, right? Like, because
Sure.
he with Scream and
Yeah.
I Know What He Did Last Summer, which were back to back, like
Mm-hmm.
he kind of reinvented that genre in a way
Yeah.
that Final Destination is kind of taken to a
Well, I thought we were just like I didn't process that we weren't just doing 90s slasher stuff.
um,
Um, how about The Faculty? Did you
I
say
like
The
The
Faculty?
Faculty.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do that.
Uh,
Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Scream 2 is actually before The Faculty. Um,
I,
I have been actually thinking of what, because the thing is, I have more than once decided I'm going to watch all the Scream movies, and then I stall out at 3 every time. But so we'll do Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and The Faculty with an optional bonus of Scream 2. All right,
works.
great. So we'll leave it there for this time. And thanks, everybody. And in the meantime, watch good movies.
Watch good movies.